Welcome to this latest edition of the First Voice podcast, brought to you by First Voice magazine, the official flagship magazine of the Federation of Small Businesses and the go-to podcast for news, tips and important information for small businesses. In this episode, we will be looking at how you can protect your small business against falling victim to a cyber attack. Research shows that a majority of small businesses' cybercrime starts with human error. In fact, just over half of cyber attacks on small businesses are the result of employees clicking on links in phishing emails, while more than 1 in 3 are the result of malware getting into digital systems. And there are plenty of other threats too. And while we've often heard many of these terms and the terms relating to IT protection and cyber attacks, often we don't have a clear understanding of how these things really occur or how to stop them. So today we will do 2 things. We will go back to basics, providing a clear guide to some of the IT and cyber protection terminology we hear a lot, but maybe a bit too embarrassed to admit we don't fully understand. And we'll explore the different types of cyber attack and risks that face small businesses today, so you can be a bit more alert to the risks they pose and also educate any of the staff that you may have to make sure that they're also well equipped to stop any attacks. To help us do that, we're joined by 2 small business cyber experts. Nick Marsden is the managing director of Sort-IT, an IT consultancy that helps small businesses with their IT infrastructure, meaning Nick can help us understand some of those terms we've probably heard but don't quite understand. And Helen Barge is managing director of Risk Evolves, a risk consultancy that helps businesses evade the dangers of malicious and accidental risks from cyber. And those risks include, regulatory problems, reputational damage, and disrupted operations. So Nick is going to kick us off by exploring some of the things that you need to know around IT and cyber prevention. And then Helen will follow on by talking around some of the different types of attacks. Nick, thanks for joining us. I thought a really good place to start would just be by, you sharing a bit of your experience of small business owners' IT knowledge and expertise. This is obviously a complicated area and it's changing all the time. Quite expectedly, a lot of people don't have a lot of knowledge around this space, right?
That's quite correct, John. Yeah. What we tend to find with owners is they're very good at their particular space. So if they're a forestry business or they're an accounting business, that's that area of expertise. When you come down to the cyber side, a lot of them, especially in the small business area, are, why would they attack me? The free antivirus I've got, AV, I've had for years, seems to be doing a good job. The Wi-Fi point that I bought seems to be okay. My internet's quite quick, but it's a home-based version, but it's doing the job. And quite often, and this doesn't go for all small businesses, but a lot of small businesses treat IT similar to marketing and some of the other soft services, that it's a necessary evil, and budgets are always very tight around that area, and that's where they quite often fall down. That a free piece of antivirus software isn't going to do the same job as a decent piece of antivirus software, but £30 a year is not a lot of money to make sure you're protected. So that's what we generally find. They're either scrimping and saving and not spending the money where they need to, or on the other hand, we do have some customers who are so ultra cautious about IT that they've actually gone completely the other way, and they've got all sorts of things that they'll never need. So it's an interesting arena at the moment.
Yeah, and that's understandable because, as you alluded to at the start, small business owners and managers, are not IT specialists. They want to focus on their core activities and growing their business and their day-to-day activities rather than thinking about IT. But there's loads of, common IT terms and IT protection tools and software that we hear about quite a bit, but we probably don't understand. I think you're going to give us a bit of a run through of some of those, just so people can have a bit of a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talk about, or you'll read a lot about sort of malware, ransomware, and those sort of things. And they all really fall under one thing, that they're viruses that have been written to destroy, damage, and proliferate themselves through the internet. Ransomware being a particularly bad one that locks all the files in your computer and on your server and any of your data that you're connected to. And then you have to pay to whoever's done it some money so you can actually get all your data back. And with quite simple protection, like an antivirus solution, doing a proper backup, taking your data off site, you can prevent those sort of attacks from actually happening. People will talk about firewalls. So firewalls within a business prevents people attacking you from the outside, but also can be used to prevent your employees going to dodgy sites. They can filter emails as they come in. They can stop the ransomware attacks at the front door. So firewalls are really useful. Routers, that's what actually connects you to the internet. So it's your little BT hub in the corner. And again, they have firewalls and all sorts of things built into them that can actually help a business if they're ever used. A lot of the industry is now talking about 2FA, or multi-factor authentication, by where, you're all familiar with when you go to your bank account, you have to put a code in from somewhere. There's so many companies who are not using 2FA to protect their email accounts. So if a hacker gets your password for your email account, they could spend a week looking at what your business does, who you send invoices to, how you get into your bank, who your contacts are, and then they can formulate some sort of attack to actually get money out of you by extortion or by emailing your base with a new bank account details, or all sorts of stuff. So there's I guess the other thing that's really important is patching and updates and stuff. People don't do that enough. They don't see a need for it. But when Microsoft release some new patches, which they do regularly every other week, there's a whole range of patches come out from Microsoft. They are basically publishing a shopping list to hackers to say, we are vulnerable here. This is how you get in, but this is how we've stopped them. And if you don't reboot your computer at least every week, then the patches don't take effect, and you're basically just leaving yourself open to a cyber attack. So it's really important that all these things that we spout, do a patch, reboot your computer, even things like encrypting your laptop. We've got customers who take customer information out, when they could go out before COVID, they'd be on the train or they'd be out and about with a laptop full of data that's sensitive to their various customers, and they don't bother encrypting. And from an IT perspective, if you gave me your laptop and it's not encrypted, within 5 minutes, I can rip all the data off your machine and get all your passwords and all your contacts off there without any issue at all. So, we don't do it. We prevent people from doing it, but it happens. So you've got to stop that sort of stuff.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, and even listening to the terminology you're using there, that's a very top level overview. But still, there's an awful lot of terms there that people won't understand or won't have a very clear understanding of. And as we alluded to before, small business owners want to concentrate on their core activities. They're not IT specialists. So what are their options for managing this? If they're not in a position to get up to speed themselves, or they're not IT savvy, what are their different routes to getting somebody to help them with this?
Right. Well, so yeah, there's different ways to look at this. As an MD myself, before I launch into anything, whether looking at accounting or marketing or anything like that, I will have a look around and see what I understand. So I think an MD should be armed with, or at least go out and have a look at the landscape of the market and what MSPs are offering and what he thinks or she thinks they should be doing. But it's like marketing, or it's like accountancy. I've got an accountant and I've got a marketing person because I'm not good at it. It's not my skill. So I think any MD of a small business, whether they take Microsoft service provider or an IT company and use them for all of their support, or they use them for some consultancy and some advice to get the right things in. I think that's the approach they should take. Obviously, I'm in business to sell my services, but if your accountant's not doing the job you need him to do, you go and look at another accountant, don't you? And IT, I guess, as a business owner, I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know the whole of the accountancy envelope, and I don't know the whole of the marketing envelope, but I know a lot about IT. And that's what our customers get from us. And that's what I think a small business, when they go to their IT provider, they've got to trust their IT provider is giving them the facts, the correct way to look at stuff, and pertinent, modern and up-to-date advice about what's going on at the moment within the industry. I mean, and even within our customer base, we protect them with 2FA. We do as much advice as we possibly can. We are seeing within our own customer base at least two or three times a week, one of our customers falls for a phishing campaign, even though they've had an educated phishing campaign to look at. The stuff is moving so fast that you do need to stay on top of it. And you need to go to an expert. You need to talk to people who know what they're doing and are having to stay up to date, like all of the IT providers are. We're being forced to stay up to date by the hackers. And that's the sad fact of life at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talk about how fast moving it is. And I want to turn to some of the threats and risks to businesses. And I'll bring Helen in. Helen, thanks for joining us. There's a lot of different risks, and they seem to be evolving all the time. And presumably that makes it all the more difficult for small businesses to keep up, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. The cyber criminals seem to be one step ahead of us all the time. And it's really important, therefore, to take a lot of the advice that Nick's given you. So, subscribing to newsletters that will give you an update on what those current threats are really, really important. The National Cybersecurity Centre, for example, puts out a lot of good information on what the current threat actors are. So where the risks are that we're seeing. But actually, there's also other forums as well. So a number of local authorities and county councils all have cybercrime organisations to support businesses. Each of the regional organised crime units have organisations within them that to support businesses. And most importantly, I think one of the new organisations which has been set up across the UK are now the cyber resilience centres. So if you Google cyber resilience centres, they are not-for-profit organisations that have been set up, supported by the police, supported by national government, to help businesses understand how they can become less exposed to cyber risk.
Oh, that's brilliant and really helpful resources there. What are some of the pertinent risks and threats facing small businesses right now? I know we've talked about it moving fast and evolving quickly, but what are some of the common ones that we're seeing right now?
Nick's alluded to them already. The two that we see most frequently are business email compromise, and that's through phishing emails, and then also ransomware attacks as well. And again, they tend to have their source in those phishing emails. And when we talk about phishing emails, I think it's really important that us as business owners think about how we can educate every single member of staff. A cyber criminal only needs to be lucky once to get into our systems. And we need to be lucky 100% of the time to try and keep these guys out of our systems. And therefore, we have to employ every resource that we have available. It's not just about technical resources. Nick's guys, for example, do a great job, but they need our support as well. So we need to understand what a phishing resource looks like, phishing email looks like. And we are as likely to receive them at home as we are to receive them at work. And unfortunately, the cyber criminal has adapted as well. So he's not just phishing now on our computers. We're hearing things about vishing, which is voice fraud. We're hearing about smishing, which is SMS text messages that you're receiving on your phone. They're using every platform that's available to really extort information about you. And one of the ways that we can all protect ourselves is to think about the information that we're just putting out there in the public domain each and every day. Think about what you're putting out on social media and who can see that information from a social media perspective. So if a criminal will craft something that's called a spear phishing, emails. So that's where they're targeting very, very specific persons within an organization, and they design it based on some of the information that perhaps you're putting out there on social media. So who are you connecting with, where you're going on holiday, where you're going for meetings. Obviously these are the times when we were out there doing meetings, but also who perhaps you're connecting with on those tools such as LinkedIn. If they can gather information and craft it to something that looks feasible and send it to somebody in your organization such that they react to it, and this is where some of the invoice fraud has its basis, then there's all sorts of things we can do to reduce that threat within our organizations.
Yeah, and what jumps out for me there is the different entry points. It's not just on premises or through your email that you're at risk. With people increasingly working at home, they might be on a less secure network, for example. As you say, the activity that they're doing on social media or other information about themselves that people can then leverage to gain their trust. They're all entry points and access points, aren't they? So it feels like it's much more complex than just the obvious entry points.
Absolutely. So, free Wi-Fi, for example, my children think that access to the internet is some sort of, right that they should have.
Yeah.
And it probably is. Not being funny, they get an awful lot. And especially, obviously, as we've been in lockdown, access to the internet for them has been exceptionally important. But actually using free Wi-Fi is probably not the most secure way, especially if you're thinking about doing financial transactions. Don't do them over free Wi-Fi. Think about just tethering using your phone. Connect via a 4G signal on your phone, and you are automatically going to reduce that threat a weeny bit and therefore help to protect your information.
That's brilliant. And then I guess, you've both mentioned that, we're doing all we can, try and stay one step ahead of the hackers, but they're moving fast. If a business is compromised, Helen, what are the sort of immediate steps they can take, or the first things they should do?
Talk to their IT provider if they have one. Mm-hmm. If they haven't got one, then there are organisations such as Action Fraud and such as the police who will help them. Within the UK, we have a problem that we aren't reporting crime enough to the police. I work with the West Midlands Cyber Resilience Centre, and they're estimating that somewhere in the region of about 1% to 2% of all cybercrime is reported to them. That gives them a problem. Because clearly they haven't got a huge amount to investigate and how they can prevent. But Action Fraud and the police have actually got teams behind them that can help you. And that would be my first starting point. Certainly, Nick, I'm sure, is going to advise to make sure that you've got backups. Make sure your backups are up to date and are regularly tested to make sure that they actually work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to come back on one point you touched on very briefly earlier on, which was around educating your staff. Small businesses might employ Saturday staff or more casual staff who won't be as up to speed on their internal processes or their IT processes. And that presumably creates a risk and another entry point. How essential is it to make sure all staff are fully trained for this?
Absolutely. And that's from, somebody, as you say, the Saturday staff, the receptionist, the MD, the CFO, the marketing person, your suppliers. They all need to have exactly the same approach and value to maintaining your systems as you yourself do. And in terms of cost, a lot of the things that Nick and I have spoken about are really, really not hugely costly. From an education perspective, there is a lot of very, very good free education out there that's available. The Metropolitan Police produce a great number of really short 2 or 3 minute cybersecurity videos. The National Cybersecurity Centre produce really great information on how you can rehearse an event, how you can prepare for if something happens within your business, what would you do? And we all know that prevention is better than cure. And if there is a problem, it's much better to be prepared than to be thinking, oh my, where do I go next? And of course, this is an FSB podcast, so we have to mention, of course, the value of the FSB membership and having cyber insurance behind us as well. I would always recommend that companies look to prevent rather than relying on your cyber insurance. But if you do have a cyber insurance policy and something goes wrong, make sure that you know the details of that cyber insurance policy and who to call. Remembering, of course, your laptop may be subject to ransomware, or you may not have access to perhaps the FSB website. So this is going to be one of those few instances where I actually say, print a copy of what those insurance details are and just record them somewhere.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for sharing those resources. That's really useful, Helen. And then, I'd like to ask both of you, before we wrap up, a little bit about the impact that some of these cyber attacks can have. I mean, the obvious thing is financial impact with things like ransomware. There's obviously disruption to your operations as well. We've read lots of stories about firms, being unable to continue operating, but it goes even further than that, doesn't it? I mean, Nick, I'll come to you first if that's all right.
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to add one thing to Helen on the national cyber. There's something called exercise in a box, and Helen's probably seen that as well. That's a really useful free tool for organisations to actually do some cyber training internally. So it basically runs them through an attack and what they would do and how we cope with it. So, but coming back to your question, from our perspective, we can do cloud backup. We can tell business owners to do all sorts of things, and some business owners simply don't get the fact that if a piece of ransomware strikes and they haven't taken their backup home that night because they do a USB backup, that the ransomware will hit the USB backup as well as all their computers, and that's it. Backup's gone. So it's backup, and then get your ISP or the MSP to show you that the backup works. So once a month, maybe they should come to you and say, yeah, we've just restored this file. This is your backup. It works. So it's not just a trust thing because as an IT provider, we're outsourced. We're not physically on premise. So if the backup device is beeping because somebody's turned the power off, it won't be able to tell us it's off necessarily because we don't know. If they haven't actually plugged the USB device in that night to do the backup, we won't know till the following morning when the backup's failed. So there's a lot of whilst there's onus on us to provide a service that works, there's the onus on the actual client to do the same stuff, to do the things that they're supposed to do. And that's from an operational perspective, and from a financial perspective. What I always say to our clients is, if you do not take this data off site, then if you do have a problem, your insurance won't cover you. They'll cover you for, if you have a fire or you get hacked, you'll get maybe covered for operational restoration, but not for data loss. And if you've got 20 years worth of data that's absolutely irreplaceable, that's it. Your business is down the pan. There's nothing you can do. So, Helen?
Yeah.
I would add, as if any of us have got business premises, we're all really good at making sure that we lock the door when we leave. We've got burglar alarms on it. We've probably got some fire extinguishers. We may have fire alarms and smoke alarms, etc. We need to think about our business data in exactly the same way as we do our physical assets, our physical premises and so on. And as Nick's just said, I firmly believe if you could put a value on data and put it on the balance sheet, we would all have a slightly different view about how we should manage it. There are some horrible stories out there, and they absolutely aren't fiction. We've heard of businesses that very sadly have failed. They've had a ransomware attack and they've not been able to recover. There's lots of stats around. If you pay a ransom, you're 4 times more likely to be attacked again than if obviously you take precautionary measures to prevent the ransomware in the first place. This is all about prevention. And unfortunately, the cure is all about us working together at, people, process, technology and leadership to make sure that these criminals do not get in.
That's a brilliant note for us to wrap on. So thanks very much for that, Helen and Nick, for your contributions too. That brings us to the end of the podcast on cyber threats facing small businesses. I'd like to thank both our participants, Helen and Nick, for sharing such brilliant insights and for making this session so useful and practical. Thank you also to our audience for listening. Please do subscribe to the First Voice podcast to receive regular updates and guidance on the big issues affecting small businesses. And please visit firstvoice.fsb.org.uk for lots more small business content and information. Many thanks for listening.